Have you ever wondered what it felt like for our distant ancestors to encounter the mysteries of life for the very first time? Imagine a world millions of years ago where the unknown wasn't just frightening, it was sacred. Humans at that time didn't just live. They observed, they questioned, and slowly, they began to feel a connection to forces beyond themselves. This wasn't religion as we know it today. It was the dawn of spirituality, a raw and intuitive sense that the universe held secrets worth revering. Early humans faced dangers daily, and protecting their young was paramount. In this crucible of survival, the first sparks of sacred belief began to form. These beliefs were not written in books or codified in laws. They were etched into the walls of caves, whispered over fires, and expressed in symbols that held power and intention. But how exactly did these early humans transform fear into faith and survival into a sacred practice? Archaeologists and anthropologists suggest that the earliest forms of spirituality were deeply intertwined with practical needs. Cave paintings, often depicting animals and human figures, were more than mere decoration. They were protective symbols, prayers carved into stone to guard the tribe's children against the unseen dangers of their world. Imagine a mother painting a bison on a cavern wall, her hands trembling not just with awe, but with the hope that the image itself could shield her little ones. These markings became an unspoken language of care and devotion, a bridge between the tangible and the mystical. But spirituality wasn't limited to static images. Humans began to experiment with sound, dance, and ritual. Drumming and chanting might have served dual purposes, uniting the tribe in collective focus and invoking unseen forces to safeguard their young. In these moments, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural blurred. Every action, every symbol, every story carried a dual meaning, survival and sanctity. What we see in modern anthropology as ritual was, for our ancestors, a lifeline, a way to communicate with the vast, unpredictable forces surrounding them. The emergence of these sacred practices reveals a remarkable truth. The human capacity for faith is as ancient as humanity itself. It wasn't taught in classrooms. It emerged from necessity, hope, and the instinct to protect those most vulnerable. Every mark on a cave wall, every whispered chant around a fire, is a testament to the creative and spiritual ingenuity of early humans. These first believers, in their raw and intimate connection with the world, laid the foundations for the complex, spiritual landscapes that would follow millennia later. If this glimpse into the first sparks of human spirituality fascinates you, imagine exploring the rituals and symbols that evolved from these early acts of devotion. Share your thoughts below. Do you think these ancient humans truly believed in their symbols? Or was it a clever survival tactic? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the hidden corners of human history. As humans ventured further into the world around them, the walls of their shelters became canvases of communication, storytelling, and protection. Cave art, one of the most vivid testaments to early human spirituality, was never just decoration. Each line and curve held intention, a silent language meant to connect the physical and spiritual realms. These images of animals, hunting scenes, and abstract symbols were likely infused with hope and reverence, a way to influence unseen forces and ensure safety, especially for the tribe's children. Scholars suggest that the repetition of certain symbols was not accidental. Patterns emerged across distant regions, hinting at a shared understanding that these marks carried power. The very act of painting or carving into stone may have been ritualistic in nature. A hunter preparing to venture into dangerous territory could mark a cave wall, almost as if leaving a prayer behind. In this context, the image of a bison or deer was more than a record of daily life. It became a talisman. It embodied a protective essence, a spiritual insurance policy drawn from observation, intuition, and fear. Anthropologists note that the placement of these paintings often aligns with specific acoustic properties of caves, suggesting that rituals might have included chanting or rhythmic sound to amplify the potency of the symbols. These sensory experiences reinforced a sense of connection to the sacred, a bridge between human intention and the natural world. Beyond imagery, early humans also relied on gestures, body language, and the subtle choreography of social rituals to convey protection and care. A mother humming over her child, a group circling a fire in synchronized movement, or elders performing complex rites. These were all methods to embed a sense of security into the tribe's collective consciousness. Every action was a form of storytelling, teaching younger generations about the power of symbols and the unseen forces that govern survival. This transmitted not only practical knowledge, but also spiritual understanding, ensuring that reverence for life and the sacred persisted across generations. In observing these early practices, modern researchers see the emergence of an intricate symbolic network, a proto-language of protection. It was a system that did not require words, only intent, imagination, and a deep sensitivity to the surrounding environment. The symbols, etched on cave walls or worn as temporary markings, were early declarations of faith, evidence that humans have long sought to influence the unseen to safeguard what they value most. Through these primitive yet profound acts, our ancestors demonstrated an innate understanding that spirituality and survival are inseparably intertwined, a recognition that has shaped the evolution of human belief systems for millennia. As tribes evolved, so did the ways they expressed identity and protection. Totems and tribal marks emerged not merely as decorations, but as profound symbols of belonging and defense. A carved emblem on a piece of wood or bone, or a painted sign on a person's skin, was a declaration. We are part of this tribe, and we protect our young. These markings often represented animals, ancestral spirits, or natural phenomena, linking the individual to a greater cosmic order. In essence, they were shields, visual statements that the community and its vulnerable members were under sacred protection. The choice of symbols was deliberate. Certain animals, revered for their strength, swiftness, or cunning, became spiritual guardians. A lion's paw, an eagle's feather, or a serpent motif carried more than aesthetic significance. They conveyed power, vigilance, and resilience. These symbols were often repeated across generations, evolving into a shared visual language that communicated both identity and intention. The markings served as a constant reminder to tribe members that protection extended beyond the physical realm, rooted deeply in the spiritual framework that guided daily life. The process of creating these marks was itself a ritual. Elders might oversee the carving or painting, chanting incantations or reciting ancestral stories as the designs took form. This layering of sound, story, and symbol reinforced the power attributed to the totems, transforming simple images into active instruments of spiritual safeguarding. Children, watching these rituals, absorbed not only the technical skill, but the significance behind each mark, ensuring that the protective tradition endured. Through this method, spiritual practice and education intertwined seamlessly, embedding survival strategies within cultural and religious structures. Totems also fostered a sense of unity. When every member recognized and respected the same symbols, a collective consciousness emerged, strengthening communal bonds. This cohesion was vital in a world fraught with predators, natural hazards, and intertribal competition. The spiritual and practical dimensions merged. The symbols provided both a psychological reassurance and a social framework for cooperation. Protection of the young, therefore, was not left to chance. It was codified in the language of marks and rituals. a silent yet powerful guarantee that the next generation would be guided and shielded. Even today, the legacy of these early symbols resonates. Contemporary tribal emblems, ceremonial tattoos, and sacred iconography echo the same principles of protection, identity, and continuity. Understanding these practices allows us to see that ancient humans were far from primitive. They were deeply insightful, capable of transforming fear into faith and survival into a shared spiritual mission. Their totems were not merely objects, they were early expressions of what it meant to care, to believe, and to guard the future. In the shadowy corners of ancient caves and open tribal clearings, rituals were born as methods of protection, particularly for the young. These ceremonies were not merely performative, they were acts charged with purpose, blending observation, intuition, and the earliest notions of faith. Picture a circle of adults, chanting, clapping, or stamping their feet around infants and toddlers, creating a rhythm that resonated with unseen forces. Every movement and sound was meant to summon protection, to ward off danger, and to assert a connection between the tribe and the mysterious powers that shaped their world. Anthropologists believed that these early rituals were intricately tied to natural phenomena. Certain phases of the moon, seasonal migrations of animals, or even weather patterns dictated the timing and nature of these ceremonies. A ritual performed at the right moment was thought to be potent, amplifying the spiritual energy believed to safeguard children. Leaders and shamans, those who had demonstrated a heightened sense of perception or intuition, often guided these practices, interpreting the signs of the world and translating them into protective actions. The young, vulnerable members of the tribe were not passive observers. Their presence was central, a focal point that made the ritual both urgent and sacred. Objects used in rituals were often symbolic and practical simultaneously. Feathers, bones, shells, and pigments were arranged with care, each selected for its perceived power. A painted spiral on a wall, a carefully placed stone, or a charm hung around a child's neck became more than decoration. They were vessels of intention, physical anchors for spiritual protection. Through repetition, these rituals also reinforced communal values, teaching each generation that the safety and welfare of the young were a collective responsibility, intertwined with spiritual understanding. The communal aspect of these protective rituals cannot be overstated. By participating, tribe members reinforced social bonds, creating a network of vigilance that extended beyond any single individual. Through shared movement, shared symbols, and shared intent, humans transformed the abstract concept of protection into something tangible and actionable. It was a remarkable fusion of imagination, culture, and instinct, a practice where belief itself became a tool for survival. Now imagine witnessing such a ritual, centuries before written history. What symbols or gestures do you think were most effective in safeguarding children? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you interpret the protective magic of these ancient ceremonies. Nature was more than a backdrop for ancient human life. It was a teacher, a guide, and a living source of spiritual meaning. Early tribes didn't see themselves as separate from the rivers, mountains, and forests around them. Instead, they recognized a profound interconnection between the natural world and their own. Survival. Every element of nature carried lessons and warnings, but also opportunities for protection, particularly for their young. The patterns of animal behavior, the cycles of the moon, the shifting seasons, all became part of a complex spiritual map, one that guided decisions and shaped rituals. Trees, rocks, and flowing water were imbued with sacred significance. A particular tree might be considered a guardian, its branches a protective canopy for the children playing beneath it. Stones, arranged in circles or lines, could mark a safe path or denote a spiritually charged site. The sound of a river or the wind through a canyon might be interpreted as messages from spirits or ancestors, reinforcing the idea that the world itself was alive and responsive. Observing these patterns wasn't merely superstition, it was a careful calibration of experience, survival instinct, and emerging spiritual insight. Animals, too, played a crucial role in the spiritual lives of ancient humans. Predators represented danger and caution, while herbivores symbolized abundance and fertility. Certain creatures were revered as protectors, embodying qualities the tribe wished to invoke: strength, vigilance, swiftness, or wisdom. Symbols representing these animals appeared in cave paintings, amulets, and ritual objects, connecting the tribe to the natural forces they admired and sought to align with. For children, these symbols were not abstract. They were active elements in the protection and teaching of the next generation. By understanding the habits and patterns of animals, children learned to navigate the world safely while absorbing spiritual lessons about respect, balance, and the power inherent in the environment. Even the landscape itself became a sacred classroom. Mountains, caves, and valleys weren't just physical features. They were sites of initiation, reflection, and ritual. A cave might serve as a shelter and a canvas for protective imagery. A mountain peak could symbolize connection to the heavens, a place to send prayers or intentions for the safety of children. By integrating physical experience with spiritual symbolism, early humans created a deeply interconnected worldview. Survival, education, and faith were not separate domains. They were woven into a continuous practice of observation, reverence, and protection. Through their relationship with nature, ancient humans demonstrated an extraordinary sensitivity to the world around them. They learned to see threats and opportunities simultaneously, to interpret the movements of animals and the rhythms of seasons as messages from a larger spiritual framework. This holistic understanding laid the foundation for the rituals, symbols, and beliefs that defined human spirituality for millennia, ensuring that each generation grew up not only aware of danger, but attuned to the sacred patterns that surround life itself. Among the earliest human societies, certain individuals emerged who seemed uniquely attuned to the unseen dimensions of their world. These were the shamans, the mediators between the physical and spiritual realms, guides whose knowledge was rooted in observation, intuition, and deep ritual practice. Their role extended far beyond healing or divination. Shamans were protectors, teachers, and interpreters of forces that influenced the tribe's survival. For the young, their presence was a crucial safeguard, as these spiritual leaders embodied the knowledge needed to navigate both the tangible and mystical challenges of life. Shamanic practices often involved altered states of consciousness, achieved through rhythmic drumming, chanting, or movement. In these states, shamans would journey symbolically to encounter spirits, retrieve guidance, and bring back strategies to protect the community. Every vision, every ritualized action was imbued with intention, reinforcing the tribe's sense of security. The young, often present during these ceremonies, witnessed a world where faith and practical guidance intertwined, learning that safety was not merely a matter of physical vigilance, but also spiritual alignment. Objects and symbols were central to shamanic practice. Feathers, bones, masks, and pigments were carefully selected for their perceived spiritual resonance. A mask worn during a ritual was more than a disguise. It transformed the shaman into a conduit for power, allowing the tribe to channel protective energies toward their children. Patterns, drawn on the ground or walls, became maps of spiritual journeys, encoding knowledge that could be interpreted and acted upon by those initiated into the tribe's sacred practices. In essence, every object carried multiple layers of meaning, practical, educational, and mystical, blurring the line between tangible tools and spiritual instruments. The shaman's influence extended into daily life. Beyond ceremonies, they instructed the tribe in observing natural signs, interpreting dreams, and understanding animal behaviors as omens or messages. This knowledge was particularly vital for protecting the young, who relied on adults to anticipate dangers and teach caution. In this way, shamanic guidance was both preventative and empowering, instilling awareness and reverence in children from an early age. Through these practices, it becomes clear that shamanism was not an abstract belief system, but a deeply functional spiritual technology. It merged observation, ritual, and imagination into a cohesive framework for understanding and influencing the world. Ancient humans, entrusting and following shamans, created a structured way to ensure survival, spiritual growth, and protection for their youngest members. Their ingenuity reminds us that early spirituality was practical, imaginative, and profoundly human, weaving the sacred into the fabric of everyday life. Across ancient tribes, one of the most tangible expressions of faith and protection came in the form of amulets, charms, and small ritual objects. These items were far more than mere decoration. They were portable symbols of power, meant to safeguard individuals, especially the young, from harm. A carved bone pendant, a polished stone, or a piece of dyed animal hide carried the intent of the tribe's collective knowledge, observation, and spiritual ingenuity. For early humans, these objects transformed abstract hope into a tangible, tactile form of protection. Archaeological findings reveal a remarkable consistency in the use of protective items across distant regions. Amulets shaped like animals, celestial symbols, or abstract patterns were common. An owl might symbolize wisdom and vigilance, a serpent, cunning and stealth. Each symbol carried multiple layers of meaning, linking the wearer to the traits of the creature or element represented. For children, these objects were not merely personal adornments. They acted as shields imbued with ancestral guidance, conveying a sense of safety even when adults were absent. The creation of these objects was often ritualistic. Selecting materials, carving shapes, and applying pigments were deliberate acts of intention. Some items were worn as necklaces or bracelets, others were placed in sleeping areas or carried in pouches. Each placement and choice of material had symbolic significance, reinforcing the belief that these charms could influence the unseen forces surrounding the tribe. Repetition and consistency in crafting and using these objects strengthened their perceived potency, embedding them deeply into the daily life and spiritual consciousness of the community. Interestingly, the power of these objects lay not solely in their material form, but in the collective belief and understanding invested in them. Adults explained their purpose to children, telling stories of past protections and heroic acts linked to similar charms. This teaching method ensured that even the youngest members internalized the spiritual significance of these objects, learning the values of vigilance, respect, and faith through practice. The combination of narrative, craftsmanship, and belief made these items far more than superstitions. They were instruments of social cohesion and psychological security. Examining these protective artifacts today, we can see how ancient humans bridged imagination and survival. The amulets remind us that early spirituality was deeply practical and personal, a toolkit for navigating an unpredictable world. What kind of objects do you think held the greatest protective power for children in these ancient tribes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're curious to hear how you imagine the magic of these early charms. Before written language existed, stories were the most powerful tools humans had to transmit knowledge, values, and spiritual practices. Oral traditions were not mere entertainment. They were carefully constructed narratives designed to teach, warn, and protect. For children, these stories served a dual purpose. They entertained while embedding crucial lessons about survival and the unseen forces believed to influence life. Through repetition and performance, elders ensured that each generation internalized these lessons, connecting practical guidance with spiritual understanding. The tales often featured animals, ancestors, or supernatural beings acting as guardians or teachers. A story about a cunning fox might illustrate the importance of vigilance, while a tale of a protective spirit could instill respect for sacred spaces or natural boundaries. In this way, the narrative became an interactive form of protection. Children learned what to fear, what to revere, and how to behave in ways that would keep them safe. The stories were dynamic, evolving with the environment and experiences of the tribe, ensuring relevance and efficacy across generations. Oral traditions were also performance-based. Rhythm, repetition, gestures, and song enhanced the memorability and perceived power of each tale. This multisensory approach reinforced the spiritual potency of the stories, making them more than mere instructions. They became ritualized acts that invoked protection for the listeners. The tribe's collective memory was encoded in these performances, turning knowledge into living, breathing practice. Even simple lullabies, sung to infants, often carried these protective qualities, combining melody with symbolism to create a comforting spiritual presence. In addition, these stories fostered social cohesion. By sharing a common set of narratives, tribes created a collective consciousness where everyone understood the spiritual rules and protective norms. Children learned not just from instruction, but through immersion in a cultural and spiritual framework that emphasized care, respect, and vigilance. The oral tradition effectively bridged the gap between imagination and reality, offering a sense of security that transcended physical boundaries. Through this lens, we see that storytelling was not ancillary. It was central to the spiritual and practical life of early humans. The oral transmission of knowledge provided a robust framework for protection, weaving survival strategies and sacred belief into a single compelling narrative. It reminds us that the first educators were not merely storytellers. They were spiritual guides, ensuring that the youngest members of the tribe were both aware of danger and connected to the Yao, forces that could safeguard them in a mysterious, unpredictable world. As human societies grew and developed, the spaces they considered sacred evolved alongside their spiritual practices. The earliest sanctuaries were natural shelters, caves, rock overhangs, and secluded groves, chosen for their safety, acoustics, and sense of mystery. These locations were not only practical refuges from predators and harsh weather. They became stages for rituals, storytelling, and the creation of protective symbols. Caves, in particular, with their shadowy recesses and echoing chambers, amplified the perception of power and presence, transforming ordinary acts into deeply meaningful ceremonies. Over time, as communities settled and expanded, humans began to intentionally modify these spaces to enhance their spiritual resonance. Stones were arranged in circles or patterns, walls were etched with intricate symbols, and certain areas were designated for particular rites or gatherings. The transition from purely natural spaces to constructed ritual grounds reflected a growing understanding of symbolism, community coordination, and the need for shared spiritual experiences. These spaces allowed tribes to concentrate protective energy, both for the young and the wider community, turning the landscape itself into a network of sacred influence. The evolution of sacred spaces also mirrored the evolution of social complexity. As tribes became larger and more structured, designated ritual grounds helped reinforce social hierarchies, communal responsibilities, and collective identity. These areas acted as focal points for education, storytelling, and spiritual instruction, ensuring that younger members learned the beliefs, protective practices, and ethical frameworks valued by the group. In this sense, sacred spaces were both practical and symbolic. They served as arenas for teaching survival and spirituality simultaneously. Archaeological evidence indicates that certain natural features, like springs, cliffs, and specific rock formations, were consistently selected across distant regions, suggesting that early humans had a shared intuition about the power of location. By aligning rituals with natural phenomena such as sunrise, moon phases, or seasonal changes, tribes maximized the perceived potency of their practices. The interaction between human intention and the environment highlights a sophisticated understanding of the world, a recognition that sacred spaces could influence both perception and reality. From the shadowy caves of early humans to more deliberately constructed ritual grounds, these spaces were foundational to the development of human spirituality. They were laboratories for experimentation, places where imagination, observation, and belief intersected to protect, teach, and inspire. The evolution of sacred spaces illustrates that spirituality was never abstract or passive. It was a tangible, lived practice, deeply integrated into the landscape and daily life of early humans. Through these sacred places, ancient communities ensured continuity, protection, and a sense of connection to the forces they revered. The echoes of ancient spiritual practices still resonate in our modern world, often in ways we barely recognize. The symbols, rituals, and protective beliefs developed by early humans laid the groundwork for many contemporary spiritual systems. Even today, tribal ceremonies, amulets, and sacred spaces reflect principles first explored millions of years ago. These ancient practices remind us that the impulse to protect, teach, and connect with unseen forces is deeply ingrained in humanity, transcending time and culture. Consider how modern rituals, whether meditative, ceremonial, or symbolic, mirror the earliest forms of spiritual expression. Yoga sequences, prayer rituals, or protective charms echo the same human desire to create order and safety in an unpredictable world. The notion of sacred space, from temples to personal altars, owes much to the evolution of caves, groves, and constructed ritual sites. Children today, even indirectly, participate in forms of protection that their ancestors invented. Bedtime rituals, protective blessings, and storytelling all stem from a millennia-old human need to guard and guide the young. Symbols continue to carry powerful meaning. Tattoos, jewelry, and visual iconography often embody protection, identity, or connection to a larger spiritual framework, directly tracing back to the totems, cave paintings, and amulets of ancient tribes. The continuity of these practices shows that while the form may change, the underlying intent remains remarkably consistent. Faith, in its earliest human expressions, was as much about safeguarding the next generation as it was about understanding the mysteries of life. This dual purpose persists today, demonstrating that the human drive for both survival and transcendence has always been intertwined. Reflecting on this deep connection can inspire a renewed appreciation for our own spiritual practices. Understanding that our ancestors were experimenting, observing, and embedding protection into every symbol and ritual invites us to see spirituality as both practical and imaginative. Modern humans can draw lessons from this ancient wisdom, that care, creativity, and reverence are inseparable, and that the symbols we surround ourselves with, whether tangible or conceptual, shape our perception and well-being. If you've enjoyed exploring these ancient connections, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Share in the comments below the symbol, ritual, or belief from your own life that you feel carries the protective power of your ancestors. And while you're here, check out our next video, exploring how prehistoric rituals influence the earliest written spiritual texts. You won't want to miss it.